Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. And this, of course, is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. The Audit Bureau of Circulations data for the fourth quarter of 2020 was released this week. And according to reports, there'll be no rebound for print and newspapers in particular. Australia is on the verge of adopting a law that will force digital companies to pay for news content, something that would create a global precedent in the media industry. In our News and History feature this week, we take you back to 2012 when the ANC expelled one of its youth league leaders. Can you remember who that might have been? Find out a little bit later on in the program. So that's the show. Now, the Audit Bureau of Circulations released data for the fourth quarter of 2020 this past week. The data paints a rather grim picture of the print industry as it is today. According to the report, circulations for daily newspapers are down by 40% on average, and that's over 1 year. And in extreme cases, including many titles in the independent media stable, the declines are over 60%. Though the decline is not new, nor is it unique to the South African market, daily news has become a commodity and is freely available on the internet. For this discussion, we're now joined by Director at Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird. William, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Good to talk to you. It's been a while, but it's always good to have you on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so, I'm going to start with COVID-19 because that was a great a huge disruptor for pretty much everything. So whatever was wrong got 10 times worse and much quicker because of COVID-19. Can we say that that applies to the print media and circulation?
Yeah, pretty much. It just certainly hurried up that trend that we were seeing over the last couple of years of declining, copy sales. Against that, of course, is the fact that all of them, media, as far as I'm aware, it's witnessed significant increase in their online audiences over the period. So, in as much as it's really bad news for their circulation and for the idea of having a physical, newspaper to read, it's not bad news for the importance of news media generally.
All right. So, are we saying that the era of print newspapers and going to the shops and buying a newspaper, that we now can acknowledge that chances are that time has come?
Well, pretty much to the extent that you'd go there and expect a large array of these things. I think what we will see is pretty seen in lots of other parts of the world as well, where you see niche entities. So they're not going to disappear entirely, but you'll see, less newspapers available, and they'll be niche, and they'll probably be, weekly reads that'll have a lot of other content in them. A lot closer to things that we used to see sort of 20 years ago in terms of newspapers that would take a long time to get through and have a lot of, good quality content in them, so that people are willing to fork out the money for a physical thing that they can take. But I think that those, the dailies has been the common means of disseminating, up-to-date information. That's been taken over for years by social media and the internet. So that period, I think, is definitely, if it's not quite dead, it's just about dead.
All right. We're also joined on the line by Hopewell, who's with the South African National Editors Forum. And Hopewell, I am wondering, when you were young and wanting to be a journalist and very excited and looking forward, you never envisaged that we would be at a time like this, because back in the day, newspapers were always going to be there forever.
Yes, and good morning to the listeners. There was always that sentiment that this was a colossal giant, who's never going to come down on its knees for anything. There was that sentiment that journalism and the media industry itself, it's forever, yeah. And what we are seeing now, though, is that maybe even us as we came in, we didn't get what you call that opportunity at universities and colleges to learn about how the industry can be sustained, because it was not a topic that even academics thought they could need to teach journalists.
Are we going to see people not choosing journalism as a career? And I mean, we live in a world of, I don't know what they're called, social media influencers and content creators, I think they call themselves. Anybody literally with a phone can be a journalist. Are we going to see people perhaps already saying, look, I'm not going to get a job, the chances of a long career in journalism are not there anymore, and we'll start to see potentially great journalists not getting into the profession at all?
I think that will be a defeatist attitude. If anybody who's not even a journalist starts saying, I can do better than journalists, and they start creating their content, and we then curl up and roll over and die, that would be a sad moment in journalism. I think this is an opportunity for journalists to say, come what may, we will do it, we will make it. And maybe it is even more of a challenge for the media sector to not just work independently of what is happening in the newsroom, because the problem we are having, there is a disjointer. You find that the CAs who are running the media industry are not coming down to journalists and say, how can we improve your working space to make you be the giant again? And I think that's where the creativity is. Journalists in the newsrooms are the ones who are supposed to say, I can do better. Give me the opportunity and the right, to write and be edited, yes, but in this platform. Because right now we are still restricting platforms. So we have those who are not under any laws creating content out there, and people are following it. And those who have the ability, the training to create the content, but are being restricted somehow in the newsroom. So I think this thing has to be turned on its head. And CEOs have to start engaging the journalists and say, how can you do better? With what instrument can you do better? And also it should be less restrictive. I think with innovation and a little bit of freedom, we can turn the tables around and journalism can thrive again.
William, one of the things that we started to see more and more of, I mean, the community newspapers started it where they literally just give away their newspapers, and that's how they guarantee, inverted commas, their circulation. We started to see mainstream papers do the same, give away a portion of their newspapers. Are we so far down the line that even giving away the paper is not going to be enough?
Well, it's not so much that it's not enough. It's just about how that model is economically sustainable. And they used to work that you could give your copy away if you were getting enough adverts in order to cover your printing and distribution costs. And now those sums are just not adding up. And it's precisely because of what you said you're going to be talking about later in your program, which is around what's happening with Facebook and the big tech. Those are the ones that have come in and they've eaten that advertising pie. In the States and Europe, they take 80% and upwards of all of that advertising. So when you're left with that, it means that if you're trying to run a journalism business, where are you getting your money from? Because you're not getting it from shifting to digital. So they really are caught between a rock and a hard place, which is ironic because, of course, the importance of journalism now, and let's be clear, I mean, you said anyone with a phone can be a journalist. Well, they can report on stuff, but to be a journalist and to be acknowledged as one means you have to agree to adhere to specific principles. You can't just make stuff up, for example. You've got to be ethical. The SABC is its editorial policies. To work for the public broadcaster, you have to adhere to the highest standards of ethical journalism, and that's a fundamentally different role to someone who just says, I've got a camera and I can do this. And why does that matter? It matters because people need information that they can know and trust and that is credible and accurate and verified. And that you can't get from just someone who just has a phone necessarily. I'm not saying that they're all like that, but you need that ability of a public broadcaster, for example, that if something has happened, I can switch on and I can whatever channel, on whether it's on devices or whatever, and I can see and get an understanding of what's happened. So the trick, of course, as Hopewell has pointed out, is how on earth do we make that sustainable? And what you're seeing globally is that they're saying, well, the big giants have taken away the advertising. They need to contribute to helping make media sustainable, and that may be part of the answer, but there have to be other ways of kind of recognizing journalism as a public good, which is a very different thing to seeing it as a cash cow, which is what historically it used to be seen as by a lot of those people who used to run newspapers.
So, I mean, we accept as well that our world is going digital more and more, and the question is, how do you make it work financially? Some titles, Financial Times, etc., have been able, because of the reputation and the brand, been able to convert to paywalls and people pay. Then you get papers like The Guardian who are still free, but they're asking people to donate to the reading. Is this what we're going to see more and more of? People trying to figure out which way to go in terms of how to make money from their reporting?
Yeah, I think the idea that you could just set up a standard model, bring in the advertising and rake in the cash, that's just gone. You are going to see media increasingly having to be agile and think of how they can bring in different resources and cover their costs of paying their journalists. That's their most critical resource, actually. And so for small commercial media in towns and areas, they have an even bigger challenge because, of course, how on earth are they meant to do that where their audiences aren't that big? So it's easier for The Guardian, for example, which has a massive staff, but they also have a global readership, to then ask for membership and then rely on their trust. But New York Times, similarly, you can do that. But again, both of those media have been close to the brink on a number of occasions. And if they are like that, where they have massive established global brands, you can only imagine how much it's a million times harder for any of the small local media, and especially when we're down here where data costs are still too high and internet access is still too high. So not only do we say to our media, okay, well, your print model is failing and just about dead, but don't worry about going to digital, because there, most of your audiences can't afford it to read it anyway. So they're going to go and rely on free content that they're getting through the other social media platforms. So for them, this is a real existential crisis as to how on earth they're going to possibly function. So I mean, and as I said, ironically, their importance now is even greater to our democracy and our ability to function as a democracy.
Hopewell, I mean, I just see challenges all the way here, and I just wonder does somebody start a publication now, or what do they do? Is this something that people can turn to, or is it that the ones that are there already must just find a way to survive?
It is both ways, actually. We at the TANF, we recently had an application by one body that says we want to register, and of course we send them to the Press Council to know how to do the registration, and they will be coming back to us with their editors to be members. But what we are looking at is that there are those who are getting into the field and saying we can do this. Look at Arena, the new owners who bought the Sunday Times and Sowetan and so on, that stable, and they believe that they can make a difference. And while other people are running away and thinking that it cannot be done. Look, the solution is multifaceted. First of all, we need to embrace a social media platform. We need to embrace a digital, and then start thinking innovatively of how to make it work for us. Because so far, I think the resistance has been that, no, the print will survive forever. It has to survive. It must survive. So we are cringing and working in circles instead of trying to find how to merge these platforms, which is something that around the world we are seeing examples of the what you call the New York Times and others trying to make it work. Let's embrace this and try to make it work. It will work.
William, ABC circulation figures, is that going to be something, again, something of the past?
Well, you're already seeing a lot more nuanced kind of figures coming out through social media where they can tell you not only how many things are circulated, but they can give you a lot more in-depth idea of which stories are doing really well and which ones are being engaged with the most, etc. So those kinds of indicators will shift and amend, and that's a good thing. It helps news organizations know what their audiences are engaging with and how they can shape it and keep their attention, etc., etc. So there's a lot of good things that come out of that. I think, but the reality is those is the kind of the big figures that we all wait for to see and see, who's risen and who's fallen. Now we're going to just, every time we see that, we're all going to be shocked and go, oh dear, that's bad, and look at the numbers continuing their treacherous decline. But again, it's, as Hopewell is saying, it's not like there's no room for hope and optimism. We have seen some, great success stories in South Africa. If you look at something like the Daily Maverick, they people are looking at them from all around the world as to how they've.
All right, it looks like we might have lost William Bird there. Hopewell, perhaps we can start to wrap up this conversation by, I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of the way forward. Are we writing different stories because we know that they're on smaller screens? Are we writing them differently because we know they're on iPads instead of newspapers? And are we writing them shorter? Is that what we'd be forced to do as journalists now?
It is called to adapt or die. So my sentiment is that let's not make reservations about any of the stuff. Let's expect as much as possible. The circumstances demand of us to be creative and innovative. They usually say that necessity is the mother of invention. So, and this is what we are facing. But also, just to mention, squeezing the point that SANEF has started a conversation with the president to look at sustainable funding models for particularly community media space and related space. And we had established what we call a three-a-side, where there are three government representatives and three media representatives. And what they are doing is to try and create a platform where there will be discussions, and it will involve the owners, it will involve community, the MDDA, and others to look at those funding models. Already, we have Professor Harry Dagmore looking, and together with other researchers, looking at other models that are happening either in France, in Canada, and so on. So sooner or later, people should watch this space, particularly to keep the survival of community media. We will soon have some modeling funding ideas that are coming up, and government will be looking into that. We therefore mourn the death of Jackson Mthembu because he was leading that, but we hope the new minister will take the baton and run with the goals, because we know that there is a dedication from the presidency. President Cyril Ramaphosa wants to see us being up there in terms of creating a model that will be emulated by other African states.
All right, Hopewell Radebe, stay with us. We're going to chat to you a bit more after the break as we take a look at the curious case of a journalist who perhaps had one too many to drink and had to apologize about something that he wrote. All of that still to come. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, on the 3rd of February, Nigerian journalist with the Guild Press Limited, Benjamin Anaja, on Wednesday, February the 3rd, 2021, for allegedly recording and taking pictures during an enforcement operation by the officials of Lagos Environment Sanitation Corps at Meridian bus stop along the Lagos-Abeokuta Expressway. A video recording by the journalist reveals that despite showing his identity card during the act, over 9 aggrieved enforcement officials reportedly went ahead to brutalize him and held him in their Black Maria for allegedly violating their law. According to Anaja, he was at the bus stop capturing the dilapidated state of Lagos-Abeokuta Expressway from Abule Egba to Sangor Tollgate, interviewing commuters and traders on how bad the road had continued to affect their businesses and other activities when the officials stormed the axis to enforce the state's sanitation law, a situation that caused some pandemonium. On the 5th of February, Alfredo Quito, who's a reporter for the Catholic Church-run radio Expulsion, Angola's oldest privately owned radio station, was badly bitten by a police dog whilst covering a small civil society protest against the government in Onjiva. The reporter's injuries were so bad that he required hospital treatment. According to Quito, the police unleashed the dogs as he was conducting interviews and was clearly identifiable as a journalist by the Radio Ecclesia vest that he was wearing. And on the 17th of February, Facebook started restricting Australians' users from finding or sharing news on its service because of a proposed law in the country that would require that social media giant to pay news publishers for content. Well, Facebook and other tech firms have pushed back hard against Australia's world first legislation, fearing that it could create a global precedent and hit their business model. From early Thursday, Australians were unable to post links to news articles or view the Facebook pages of local and international news outlets, whilst users logged in overseas could not view Australian news pages. All right, so that's just a look at some of the issues that are playing out, and we'll try and dig deeper into that Facebook story because it could be quite interesting if these tech giants, the Facebooks of this world, have to pay for news, and right now they're blocking Australians using it. I'm sure the public will have something to say about that as well. All right, it's time now for us to go back to our news archives and take you back in history. And today we go back to the 29th of February 2012. And this is when the African National Congress expelled its youth league leader, Julius Malema. This is how the SABC covered the story.
The ANC Youth League is to convene an urgent meeting on Sunday to discuss the expulsion of Julius Malema. The ANC's NDC expelled Malema last night. It found Malema had shown no remorse for his actions and was not prepared to be disciplined by the ANC. Several provincial youth leagues rallied around Malema, rejecting the decision to expel the youth league leader. The disbanded youth league in KwaZulu-Natal welcomed the sanction and urged Malema to accept it. The ANC has declined to comment. Last night, Malema's supporters and detractors clashed in Seshego, Malema's hometown. There's a heavy police presence tonight. Cameraman Llewellyn Carstens captured this dramatic footage last night.
Malema's opponents must have known this was unlikely to go unchallenged. Their victory parade quickly descended into chaos as Malema's supporters retaliated. Malema's followers started gathering outside his grandmother's home early yesterday, expecting that mayhem would follow the announcement. Malema wanted to make sure his granny was safe. As the hours wore on, a party atmosphere prevailed. An armed man is seen here among the crowds. Minutes after the sentence, a defiant Malema emerged.
I will die for what I believe in. I've not done anything wrong.
Never.
I did not steal from anybody.
No.
I did not kill anybody. I spoke on behalf of the ANC Youth League.
Police confirmed 2 people were injured in the fighting. They're investigating who fired the shots. But the ANC Youth League in Limpopo blames hired thugs. Valdi Karelser, SABC News.
The streets of Seshego quiet after violent scenes last night. The battle today moved to the boardroom. Malema's home province has rallied behind him. The Youth League says it's ready for mass expulsions if necessary.
Autonomy of the Youth League is being undermined. We can't have the leadership of the ANC Youth League on which, if it wants to speak, it must consult with the President Zuma. The Youth League must speak its own mind.
Malema is also a provincial executive committee member. The ANC in Limpopo wants a political solution.
As the PEC, we at one stage may want the matter to be engaged politically so that we can find a solution.
Youth League structures across the country also came out in support of their leaders. The Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, Free State and KZN all spoke out.
We stand by our leadership and will continue to recognize them as elected and reaffirm that the highest decision-making body of the Youth League will decide their leadership and nobody else.
Can't say we are shocked by the outcome, but we're quite disappointed that the outcome would pronounce expulsion.
More support in Mpumalanga on the fringe of an ANC centenary celebration. The event went off without disruption. The mother body itself is silent on the NDC decision.
There's no comment. You know that disciplinary issues are handled by the committee responsible for that. Once you make it a free-for-all, you're going to spoil it.
Malema is at home in Seshego where his political career began. That's where he plans to stay for a while. Mahlatse Gallants, SABC News, Polokwane.
All right, so a remarkable story there, 2012. And of course, who knew at that point in time that one of the most influential parties in politics in South Africa would be born out of that? Julius Malema, of course, went on to form the Economic Freedom Fighters, and a lot of those young people that you saw probably were the first members of that new party. And that party has stood the test of time and has grown significantly in size and influence over time, all coming out of his expulsion from the ANC back in 2012. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, we're going to explore a story that's played out in this past week. A veteran journalist and renowned journalist, actually, author as well, Jacques Pauw corrected a mistake over a story that he wrote about his V&A waterfront arrest. And he wrote a sincere apology, and it was quite long. And he said that he was sorry and that he felt embarrassed by what had happened. And essentially, he got arrested at a restaurant, and he went and wrote an article after that, and essentially was pointing fingers in certain directions, and that cast aspersions on the V&A waterfront itself, and also how the police might have targeted him. On reflection, and after speaking to the owners of the restaurant, he realized actually that things didn't go quite the way that he remembered, and he blamed that perhaps on a little bit too much wine that he had that evening. And so he then printed this retraction and apologized for what he had written. So let's go back to my guests, William Bird, who's with Media Monitoring Africa, and Hopewell Radebe, who's with the South African National Editors Forum. Gentlemen, it is an interesting case, and journalists will make mistakes over time, but we live in a time now where things are highly charged, and the moment a journalist apologizes, questions are raised about the media in general. And I just wonder, were there checks and balances perhaps that were overlooked because of the person that wrote the story in the first instance? Let's start with you, Hopewell.
You know, this is a really what you call an urgent wake-up call for all of us as journalists and guardians of the so-called ethics in journalism. You know, journalists don't understand senior, very senior or junior. They don't seem to comprehend the responsibility they carry with the name journalism behind them. You are like a South African president in a sense, because if you do wrong, the whole country reflects on you. And the same with journalists. If they do wrong one thing, and then the whole thing seems to almost collapse. It's just like saying that it takes years to build Rome, but only a minute to destroy it, just with few words. So I think that's where we find that people don't see the responsibility that they carry with the name of journalism.
William, your thoughts?
Look, it's really tragic, actually, that you had someone who was so widely respected for his investigative journalism, and that we've seen yet another one of these people who have had such a significant reputation, essentially being his own destructor. That said, what he did, I think, is pretty close to unforgivable. He didn't just make an honest mistake. Media do that all the time, and people do that all the time. All of us make honest mistakes about certain things. You may see something and then go, oh, actually, on reflection, it's not like this, it's this. But what he did was mislead people. He didn't just get some of these things wrong. They were so plainly and spectacularly wrong. He accused the police of theft, that they stole this 1,000 rand that he had in his purse. They accused him of all sorts. He accused the police of wrongful arrest and of degrading punishment, etc., etc. Now the thing is, a lot of us, when you see that story, we know that there is a lot of wrongful arrest. You know that there is a lot of degrading treatment of people that are taken into police custody, that the police do take money, they do take bribes. So that's not unexpected. And I guess that's what makes this so particularly egregious, that you had someone who had such authority because of who he is, because he was a highly respected journalist, that he then used that position to tell this particular story and to deceive people. And in so doing, he's undermined not just the trust and credibility in him and the stories he tells, but he did a huge amount of damage to the Daily Maverick that published that piece to begin with. And them again, they did a lot of checks, but did they do enough checks on these things? And I guess, when you're taking someone like that, of course, your default is if someone who comes to you is respected and tells you something, you are more likely to believe that, And so, you can understand, I guess, the degree to which media did make the error in deciding to run with that story. At the same time, there have been a number of very senior journalists that I've spoken to over this week, and editors who've said, no, they don't buy that. They don't think that they did enough tests and checks, and they shouldn't have run the story to begin with.
Hopewell, let's look at this checks and balances. I mean, you've sat in an important chair, managing staff and editing. When a journalist comes with a story that somebody else has related, you do the checks. You phone the restaurant, you phone the police.
No, they did that.
To get their version.
Yeah, that preliminary part they claim to have done, and I would understand. But here's a catch. I think when a person tells his own story, like in many cases, a person comes and say, guys, I need journalists to help me. Here's my story. And you go and seek to balance that story. Maybe that's where the catch is, because we are dealing with senior journalists that William has kindly sort of described. You tend to lower your guards. You tend to trust your fellow. It's just like police would want to defend their own. Soldiers would want to defend their own. I think this is where the mistake happened with us here, that they tended to think that because it was Jacques, surely he can't be telling lies. And because also Jacques had written stories that offend police and offended the senior, what you call management, you are inclined to quickly assume that these police officers knew who Jacques is and therefore said, oh, we got him this time, and therefore acted improperly, only to find that it was Jacques who did this. This is very arrogant in a sense, you know. It is because, you know, he seems to have forgotten that we are here also to serve the public and democrats, that his word tends to carry some weight, and he abused that level of trust that he carried. And then going back to your question, and that's what blinded maybe the editors that looked at that story. They took for granted that he could not be fabricating this. He could not be lying. And therefore, the checks were just preliminary rather than thorough. And that's where journalism is supposed to kick in and say, because this is one of our own, let us be more thorough than usual, actually.
And William, I mean, he's apologized, and surely we can't judge him on one error over a lifetime, a career. And newspapers apologize and retract stories all the time, since the beginning of time. It seems as if the axe is falling much harder on Jacques Pauw at this time, perhaps than at another time in journalism. So, yes, and I think, you know, that's appropriate, and that's because of the relative scale of the offence that he's committed, you know, and this is... So it's easy if you steal a loaf of bread to justify that, and you know, on the basis of a range of factors. It's quite another if you go up to someone with a gun and you shoot them in the head and then say, and in both of those you may apologize profusely and say, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it, etc. But you know, the level and the degree of the offence, I think, are the things that are at issue there. And certainly in this instance, it's not just that he made a mistake, you know, it's that he seems to have actively deceived the public about the events that occurred to him in that, and he actively deceived the media that he worked with. You know, he actively deceived the Daily Maverick. He said to them, this is how these things happen. They checked with the management of the V&A. They got the CCTV footage eventually. They spoke to the restaurant and they spoke to the police. So, you know, it's not like they didn't do those things. And that, so therefore, it's not as though he did something wrong in the heat of the moment where he was driven by anger and he said the wrong thing, or he lost his ability to think as a journalist, which is what happens frequently when journalists have to report on their own kinds of on their own issues or their own personal circumstances. That's not an uncommon thing in South Africa or indeed around the world. So it's not just that we're saying, well, you know, we more hard on him in this instance, but equally, you know, he was a person who had such a high level of authority because of who he was, because of who he is, you know, as a white male, as a respected investigative reporter. So when he makes a mistake, and an egregious mistake at that, you know, the consequences for that, unfortunately, do need to be significant and severe, as opposed to someone who just says, you know, they mispronounce someone's name or they spell their name incorrectly in a news bulletin or something like that. You know, those things are very different issues, where the one you can say, okay, innocent mistake, apologize, move on, you know, as opposed to others that hint at systemic issues or at things that may bring the entire reputation and credibility of journalism into question. All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the time being. Yeah, it's a difficult time for Jacques Pauw, but I think he's got a bit of time to reflect on what's happened, and maybe also a warning for all of us as well, because sometimes, especially on social media, I want to tweet so bad when I see certain things. But yeah, put the phone down, have a drink, calm down, and then tweet. All right, we'll have more for you after this. All right, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Okay, we're starting to wrap things up, but perhaps just one last look at the newspaper headlines. And let's put up the Sunday Times, because That's one, is quite an interesting story. You'll remember the former Social Development Minister, Batabile Dlamini, and apparently she's defying a constitutional court order to pay part of the legal costs that two NGOs had won in a landmark social grants case against her in 2018. And the story is she's suggesting that she can't pay, partly because her pension has been blocked at the moment, has been withheld, and she says she has no idea why this is the case. I was informed by my broker, who was instructed by the state advisor not to give me my money when I asked to say. All right, so financial difficulties, it looks like, and that we're not sure how much the amount is actually that's outstanding, but she was hoping to pay some of those costs out of her pension. But the sheriff has been struggling to serve these papers on her, apparently at the two places that residents that are in her name. And she's changed the lawyers, and that's also made it a little bit more difficult to reach her. The Sunday Independent, that's the next paper that's got an interesting story there. Twists in Moti and Gebulana saga. And this really is about two businessmen that were partners. There are still partners, but things went sour, as sometimes happens in businesses. And then what started to happen was all these underhanded tactics. This is what's coming out in court papers to try and seize control of the company. And this is going through a court process at the moment. All right, and the same paper actually, the Sunday Independent, you won't be able to see it on the screen there, but a senior police officer stationed at the Northern Cape has been placed on suspension for allegedly lying in giving reasons to suspend officers without pay. Brigadier Adri Basson was suspended on Wednesday following a court order that set aside the suspensions that he had instituted following a disciplinary hearing on 12 officers in November 2020. Not great news at all. City Press, let's take a look at that front page. And this picture I like the most, to be honest with you, is Naomi Osaka. She has won the Australian Open, and this is for the second time. And she's now won 4 Grand Slam titles. And get this, she has won her Grand Slam title every time she's played in one. So she's been in 4 finals and she's won them both. And Serena Williams has been a victim, of course, one in the final and this time in the semi-final to this player who, at her young age, she's 23, is among good company. There's just a handful of players still on the circuit, people like Novak Djokovic, people like Serena Williams, who have won 4 majors or 4 Grand Slam titles or more. So remarkable achievement there by Naomi Osaka, born in Japan but grew up in America. The other headline, of course, is this Cold War, inverted commas, between Cyril Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule. They both deny this. They both say that all is well within the ANC and the party, but it looks as if things are starting to bubble over a little bit. All right, and then the last paper that we have for you is the Sunday World. And again, the ANC making the headlines there. And this story, ANC heavyweight Smuts Ngonyama Saki Mankozoma apparently embroiled in a nasty legal battle over hundreds of millions of rand that are supposed to be paid to Bosasa Youth Development Centers. And that is going to be playing out in court, it seems, over millions. All right. That's where we come to the end of today's edition of Media Monitor. Join us again next week at the same time. In the meantime, please take care of each other, be careful, and yeah, social distance, wash your hands, all of that, because those vaccines are here, but it'll take time. Good night. Goodbye.